In the mid-2000s, my mom, Dawn, gave her life to Jesus for the very first time. Although she was raised in a Christian home, this was the first time that she had taken a relationship with Jesus seriously. And as my mom grew in her walk with Jesus, she saw how important it was for her kids, me, my brother, and my sisters, to also have a solid foundation in our faith. This meant dragging us to church every Sunday, every Wednesday, and any other opportunity she had. But one day, in 2008, everything changed. Depression, anxiety, an abusive marriage, and a split from our home church had left my mom at her breaking point, and she made an attempt on her own life. But during my mom's stay in the hospital, she was visited by a chaplain, an older gentleman who came and offered to pray with her. At the end of their conversation, he had handed her a little invite card and encouraged her to check out a church in New Baltimore called The Rock. But what he didn't know was that after an ugly church split, we had already begun looking for other churches, and we had been to The Rock a handful of times. My mom took this as confirmation that this is where God wanted us to be. Fast forward roughly 8 years to 2015. We're still attending Rock Church, we're all serving, and Pastor Angelo's son, Nick, is one of my closest friends. And by proxy, I had become extremely close to Pastor Angelo, Kimmy, and Nick's grandparents, Kathy and Charlie. But unfortunately, 2015 was also the year that Nick's grandma, Kathy, had passed away from cancer. I didn't drive at the time, but I desperately wanted to be there to support Nick, Pastor Angelo, Kimmy, and Charlie. So I asked my mom if she would be willing to drive me to Kathy's funeral. She agreed, but because she didn't know Kathy, she felt a little uncomfortable, so she asked if she could sit in the back while I sit with the family. As the service ended, I remember walking to the back to find my mom, only to find her bawling her eyes out. And I remember her pointing at Pastor Angelo's father-in-law, Charlie, and saying, "That's the guy that prayed for me all those years ago when I was in the hospital." And that was crazy to hear, because at that point, Charlie was already a spiritual mentor to me, a role model to me, a grandfather to me. And for years, I had no idea that I could trace part of my spiritual heritage back to him. So now, every time I think of Pastor Charlie, I think, that's the guy that prayed over my mom. That's the guy that prayed over me in Pastor Angelo's kitchen. That's the guy that encouraged me to go into ministry. That's the guy.